Anyone who would take the time to watch a video about history probably knows about the French Revolution. Guillotines, A Tale of Two Cities, and the storming of the Bastille. Perhaps you're even familiar with the Beast of Gévaudan, a very real animal that killed over 100 people in 1760s France that today is more often portrayed as a spooky werewolf story. I mean, the creature was even the bad guy in the 5th season of Teen Wolf. Outside of taking place in the same century, one might ask what these two series of events have in common. I'm here to posit that the Beast of Gévaudan was a very royal mistake that could have easily caused the French Revolution to occur 20 years earlier. The French Revolution was a decade of violent political and societal change that occurred from 1789 to 1799. Up to 1 million people are estimated to have died in the conflict. The revolution was a long time coming, with root causes including severe economic disparity, unemployment, disparate taxation, unjust wars, and a debt crisis. However, arguably the leading cause was a drastic change in how the lower class viewed the upper class. The Age of Enlightenment sweeping across Europe at the time, as well as the similarly ongoing American Revolution, filled the French people with ideas that were unique for a state run by a divine monarchy. Ideas like liberty, natural rights, religious tolerance, empirical science, and a constitutionalized government struck deep into the heart of the French underclass. During this time period, France's population grew exponentially, and for the first time, a true middle class emerged. Despite the formation of this newfound strong bloc, the French people still knocked their heads against the ceiling created by the nobility. The peasantry developed a hatred for the upper class, fueled by a disgust for the extravagance and wealth that they flouted during this period of such economic instability. In the end, the divine monarchy was destroyed, and approximately 2,000 nobles were executed, including the king himself, Louis XVI. Louis XVI was certainly a weak ruler, and perhaps if he had implemented stronger reforms, he could have peacefully transitioned the Kingdom of France into a constitutional government, or at the very least, saved his own life. In all fairness, however, he did not create the conditions that led to the revolution. Despite creating the divine absolute monarchy itself, the blame cannot really be laid upon his great-great-great-grandfather, Louis XIV, either. In my humble, amateur, uneducated historian opinion, the blame can almost firmly be placed solely on King Louis XV. History seems to remember Louis XV as a good person, but a horrific leader. Accounts from those close to him reveal that he was a decent father, a gentle person, and a lover of both science and poetry. However he was in his personal life, his reign and administration nearly destroyed the kingdom, setting the groundwork for the revolution. At the time, the church and the monarchy were viewed as almost one entity. The king was a near divine figure chosen by God to rule. Louis XV's reign suffered from multiple scandals that sullied this divine connection in the mind of the peasantry. The king was an open adulterer, having very public affairs with dozens of women. This was an embarrassment for the monarchy, the church, and the kingdom itself, as the affairs became the subject of political cartoons and jokes across Europe. In addition to this, Louis XV held a very public execution for a man that tried to assassinate him. While this was not uncommon at the time, the execution was particularly brutal. Robert François Damiens, thought by many historians to have likely been mentally handicapped, had rushed to Louis XV's carriage and attempted to stab him to death. For this crime, Damiens was publicly tortured for an entire day, with his torments including emasculation, the crushing of his hands and feet, and boiling oil being poured into open wounds made across his body. He was then literally pulled apart at the limbs by horses. Somehow still horrifically alive, his limbless torso was then burned at the stake. Outside of these unchristian acts, Louis XV bankrupted the kingdom with the 7 Years' War and created the debt cycle that contributed to the economic instability of the Revolution period. He suppressed any Christian sect that wasn't Catholic, and most of the kingdom's parliaments and lower courts were in open rebellion. Most heinous of all were his policies regarding the deregulation of grain pricing. Leaving the price of grain to the free market may sound good in theory, but during years of poor harvest, grain prices skyrocketed. Poor harvests and predatory pricing in 1766, 1767, and 1768 led to political rumors that the crown and nobility were trying to deliberately eliminate the poor through starvation. This Starvation Pact, as it was called, was one of the main causes of the French Revolution. The king himself understood the state of his kingdom and grimly predicted the coming revolution. He is believed to have once said to one of his mistresses, "Après nous, le déluge," meaning after us comes the flood. The beast of Gévaudan was an unidentified animal that terrorized the Kingdom of France from 1764 to 1767. The beast killed as many as 113 people in attacks spanning an area 56 by 50 miles, mostly encompassing the province of Gévaudan. The victims included men, women, and children. The attacks became known across the globe and caused such a public outcry that the monarchy had to intervene. Royal hunters killed a particularly large gray wolf in 1765, but the attacks continued until a local peasant farmer and hunter named Jean Chastel shot and killed a large unidentified animal in 1767. Jean Chastel was hailed as a hero and received a sum of money from the crown. The remains of the beast were exhibited to local crowds at the grand estate of the Marquis de Apécher, a local Gévaudan baron. The remains were then likely buried in the garden of the private mansion of nobleman Louis-Alexandre de la Rochefoucauld. To the purest skeptic, the beast of Gévaudan was likely a very large wolf, or multiple very large wolves. Wolf attacks were very common all across Europe at the time, and it is the simplest answer. I do not believe that the beast of Gévaudan was a wolf, but the salient factor of this video is not the beast's identity, but its origin. I believe the beast of Gévaudan was an animal that escaped from the royal menagerie of the crown, or even a similar private zoo belonging to a member of the nobility. I believe the crown became aware of this and took measures to keep this fact a secret. Menageries were symbols of power and wealth that the crown and nobility used to entertain each other. Animals from all around the world were captured and brought to these private zoos. The more exotic, the better. The Gévaudan attacks lasted from 1764 to 1767. This period overlaps with the worst grain shortages of King Louis XV's reign, now referenced as the Starvation Pact, as mentioned earlier. If it had come to light that one of the king's lavish pets escaped from his lavish private zoo and killed 113 peasants at a time when the peasantry already believed that they were being deliberately starved, I believe it would have been the political spark necessary for the revolution to commence 20 years earlier than it did in reality. To be fair, there isn't really a smoking gun for this theory. Perhaps one day historians will find a letter or a diary where King Louis XV discusses the matter. Then again, he was probably too busy with all of his mistresses to keep a diary. The evidence for my case falls mainly upon the beast of Gévaudan being a foreign animal. Keep in mind, the French Revolution was not just a rebellion against the monarchy, but against the entire upper class. Even if the beast belonged to a member of the nobility and not the king himself, I believe it still would have had the same effect if it had come to light. The evidence is as follows. The descriptions and eyewitness testimonies regarding the beast do not match that of a wolf. The behavior of the beast does not match that of a wolf. The autopsy performed on the beast could not definitively label it as a wolf, and was filled with odd contradictions. In addition, menageries had begun to fall out of noble interest by the time of Louis XV, and many were abandoned or in a state of disrepair. Many animals escaped, were released, or killed. Let's delve deeper. The beast of Gévaudan being some kind of foreign animal is not a far-fetched idea. Here is a contemporary print of the beast being described as a hyena. Personally, I think that the beast of Gévaudan was clearly a subadult male lion. Descriptions of the beast do vary, but the overall consensus is that it was about the size of a cow, had brownish-orange fur, had a long tail that ended in a tufted ball of hair, had a darkened stripe or multiple stripes along its back, and had a pronounced snout. This description perfectly matches young male lions before they grow their mane. I would add that it also matches the description of a liger, a hybridization of a tiger and a lion that could have occurred, say, in an abandoned royal menagerie. More importantly, everyone who saw the beast definitively said that it was not a wolf. Members of the peasantry were often quoted as saying that the beast was like a wolf, but certainly not a wolf. The average rural farmer at the time would have had extensive interactions with wolves, but most would not have been able to identify a wild lion. They may have seen stylized depictions of lions in art or on a royal coat of arms, but that's very different from seeing one in the wild, especially without its glorious mane. Captain Jean-Baptiste Duhamel, one of the royal hunters dispatched by the king, and someone who may have actually seen a lion before, had this to say: "You will undoubtedly think, like I do, that this is a monster," by that he means a hybrid, "the father of which is a lion. What the mother is remains to be seen." The only people steadfastly believing and saying that the beast was merely a wolf was the king himself and other high-ranking members of the nobility. Suspicious. Moving on to behavior, the beast was noted for a number of qualities. It was an ambush hunter, often stalking its potential victims before, and I mean this in the literal sense, pouncing upon its victim. It used camouflage, and in ideal situations, preferred to drag its prey away to a more private area. The beast was witnessed rearing up on its hind legs by multiple people, and it had no trouble attacking people on horseback. It could even jump over fences or walls when needed. If faced with resistance during an attack, it would trot away and observe from a distance. If the beast felt that the threat had passed, it would attack again. The beast killed by tearing its victim's throat out, in some cases, full decapitation. This is all feline, big predatory cat behavior. In addition, while the beast did seem to prefer children, it had no problem killing grown men and women. This would suggest a size ratio between predator and prey that would exclude wolves, even large ones. The official autopsy was conducted by a number of people, but has become known as the Marin Report, due to the main signatory being royal notary Roch Etienne Marin. The report was rediscovered in 1952 after being lost for almost 2 centuries. The examining physicians were father and son Damien and Antoine Boulanger. The report is extremely strange, most notably in its contradictions. The observational narrative of the report describes the beast as it was accepted at the time, an enormous creature with monstrous proportions, that while wolf-like, was no mere common wolf. Yet the measurements of the creature presented, including overall length, paw and claw size, and skull shape, describe the normal proportions of an average Eurasian wolf, and a small one at that. After the corpse of the beast was displayed to local crowds, it was brought to Paris under direct order of the king. King Louis XV then ordered renowned naturalist Comte de Buffon to examine the now very decayed carcass. He concluded that it was nothing more than an extremely large wolf, which again, going by the measurements listed in the Marin Report, could not be true. Biologist and author Karl Hans Take has written multiple scholarly papers on the beast of Gévaudan, as well as a book entitled The Gévaudan Tragedy. Take theorizes that the authors of the Marin Report, as well as naturalist Buffon, attempted to apply the characteristics of the real beast to the animal that Jean Chastel killed, which in all likelihood was probably a small Eurasian wolf. Take believes, as I do, that the beast was likely a subadult male lion, and that it either perished shortly before the killing of Chastel's animal or shortly after. He also theorizes, with some supporting evidence, that out-of-the-ordinary attacks by a carnivore of some kind occurred after the killing of Chastel's animal, but were covered up by local authorities, in order to reduce public outcry and panic. With that said, it doesn't really matter what the beast was. Perhaps it was a lion hybrid, a hyena, or even some kind of dog-wolf hybrid. What matters is that it was a foreign animal, or the hybrid product of foreign animals, brought to France by the nobility for the purpose of lavish entertainment in their menageries. The royal menagerie at Versailles cost approximately 500,000 livres to build, exceeding even the 200,000 livre cost of the palace itself. At the time, 500,000 livres could have fed over 100 peasants for a decade. A lack of historical data makes it difficult, but the modern equivalency of these figures is in the billions, potentially hundreds of billions in today's money. The cost of upkeep and care for the animals would have been a dizzying figure as well, although no estimation exists. The animals known to have been kept at the royal menagerie included lions, tigers, hyenas, boars, elephants, bears, a rhinoceros, coagas, coatis, zebras, domestic and wild dogs, domestic and wild cats, and countless species of exotic birds. Outside of Versailles, most of the noble families of the kingdom kept menageries, including but not limited to the House of Bourbon, the House of Orleans, the House of Condé, and the House of Mazarin. By the time of Louis XV, menageries had begun to fall out of fashion. The Age of Enlightenment ushered in modern values, even amongst the nobility. Most were left abandoned and in a state of disrepair, even the royal menagerie at Versailles. Accounts from the time suggest that King Louis XV himself only visited his menagerie once, and interestingly, on this one occasion he was gifted a lion cub by the Count of Maurepas, Jean Philippeux. In conclusion, I believe the series of events unfolded as follows. King Louis XV, through a combination of scandal and inefficient domestic and foreign policy, had driven the Kingdom of France to the brink of revolution. By the mid-1760s, the French peasantry had already developed the discontent for the nobility that would fuel the revolution 20 years later. All that was missing was a spark for the powder keg. In reality, the spark for the actual revolution was the rumor that King Louis XVI was amassing a military force for a coup against the newly formed National Assembly. Theoretically, what if a rumor had spread in the 1760s that a lavish pet of the aristocracy, especially of Louis XV himself, had escaped and brutally killed 13 regular farm folks, most of whom were women and children? In tandem with the decimating economic factors and already persistent rumor of the Starvation Pact, this would have been viewed as a direct attack on the peasantry by the nobility, and the French Revolution would have commenced 20 years earlier. I believe the beast of Gévaudan was an exotic animal, likely a subadult male lion, one that escaped from a menagerie belonging to a member of the nobility, perhaps even the king himself. I believe this animal was responsible for many deaths between 1764 to 1765, perhaps as many as 100. I believe this animal was killed by royal hunters during the organized hunts of 1765, as there was a lull in reported attacks leading into 1766. Attacks that occurred between 1766 and 1767 were likely due to regular wolves and attributed to the beast due to hysteria. I believe the administration of Louis XV, and perhaps other members of the nobility, knew that the beast was an escaped exotic animal, and that steps were deliberately taken to obfuscate this fact. The real beast was likely killed and immediately buried, with the particularly large wolf shot by François Antoine being recognized by the crown as the beast. When hysteria still continued, the crown again recognized the wolf shot by Jean Chastel as the beast, and then likely silenced any further attacks to ensure that the matter was put to rest. The death of the beast, especially given the outward appearance of royal intervention, likely acted as a cooling measure politically. The average peasant's belief in the royal system may have been failing, but at least when a literal monster was on the loose, the crown intervened. The province of Gévaudan no longer exists, and is now present-day Lozère. Perhaps one day, someone walking in the woods of Lozère will stumble across the withered and crumbling skeleton of a lion, and the true face of the beast of Gévaudan will be shown to the world.